Okay, this is our third video for Chapter 5. We're continuing to look at circular motion. This time we're going to look at a specific context with a car traveling in a circular path. In this case, there's no string holding the car to its circular path. Instead, the force comes from the friction between the tires and the road. So as long as the friction force between the tires and the road is greater than the centripetal force caused by the centripetal acceleration, the car will continue to go in a circular path. If that force is exceeded, if that friction force is not sufficient, then the car will slide off the road. And you can see here some tire marks on this racetrack where some cars haven't quite made it. That friction force has been exceeded. So one way to decrease the demand on the tires is to bank or incline the surface of the road. So I'm going to skip here to this slide so that we can visually see the diagram here of what I'm talking about. This banking, sloping the car in, helps decrease the demand on the friction. Why is that? Well, it's because the force of the gravity acts straight down. But if the road is at an angle theta, then the normal force, which is always perpendicular to the surface of the road, is actually then going up and to the right. So it's diagonal, which means it has both a vertical component and a horizontal component. That horizontal component of the normal force alleviates some of the demand on the tires, the friction demand. So we can use this equation right here. The normal force times sine of theta, the inclination of the ramp, or the banking of the road, is equal to mv squared over r. So in this case, what we're saying is the force required to keep the car in that circular path is entirely due to the banking of the road. So there actually is no friction required between the tires and the road when this equation right here, Fn sine of theta, is equal to ma sub r, that is, and a sub r is v squared over r. So when the normal force times sine of theta is equal to mass times velocity squared over r, then all of the force required to keep the car on the circular path is due to the banking of the road, and none of it is coming from friction. If you wanted to solve for theta in order to design a ramp, let's say you're designing a racetrack or a highway ramp, and you want to know what theta, how much the banking needs to be inclined, we can use this formula right here. It is the inverse tangent of velocity squared over rg. So if you're a highway engineer and you know the velocity that vehicles are going to be traveling at, you can design the banking so that it takes all of the friction force out of the equation. The cars aren't relying on friction force, but instead the banking of the road is keeping it on that circular path. This is also, by the way, how if you've been on a highway on-ramp or off-ramp and you've seen a recommended speed limit, it's probably been calculated using this formula. The recommended velocity is based on the banking of the road. That's going to help to keep your car on the road and out of the ditch. Something here to consider conceptually, although the math gets pretty nasty, so we're not going to deal with this in terms of problems, algebraic problems. But conceptually, we've been talking about some type of object traveling in a circular path at a constant tangential velocity. But what happens if we change the magnitude of that tangential velocity? In other words, we speed up the rate at which we are rotating, or we slow it down. That means that if the velocity is changing in this tangential acceleration, a change in velocity with respect to time is going to result in an acceleration. So we will have a tangential acceleration, accelerating either speeding up or slowing down in the tangent direction. And also we have our centripetal acceleration. So we have two different types of acceleration. In order to add the two of them together, we have to add them as vectors, because acceleration has both magnitude and direction. So it is going to accelerate both in this diagram horizontally and vertically. We have to sum the two together to get this diagonal sum of the two accelerations. And if the object that's rotating has mass and it's being accelerated, then that results in a force. So just something to keep in mind: if the tangential velocity is changing, that means we are experiencing two different types of acceleration: centripetal acceleration and tangential acceleration. Let's move on to gravity. That's the second part of this chapter, is gravitation. So no matter where you are on the Earth, you are being attracted towards the center of the Earth by gravity. Everyone knows the story of Isaac Newton supposedly discovering gravity when the apple fell on his head. But it is something that Newton studied. He came up with the law of gravitation, laws of motion, which we've already talked about, laws of optics, which we'll get to later in the semester. He is also credited with being at least one of the inventors of calculus. There's another guy who basically came up with it about the same time, so there is some argument as to who should get credit for that. But the thing here that this meme is pointing out is that he did all of this before the age of 26. So Newton certainly is an impressive guy and accomplished a lot in his 20s, basically. So what Newton really discovered when that apple fell on his head is a formula for or a relationship between mass, distance, and gravity. So he basically proved the idea that gravity or gravitational force is dependent on mass, and that the farther away you get from something, the less effect it has. So this formula right here will tell us the force of gravity. The force of gravity on any object is equal to g, which we haven't talked about yet, times m1 times m2. Those are the masses of the two objects, times or divided by r squared. So let's say we've got the Earth and the Moon. So they each have mass. We've got m1 and m2, and they are some distance apart from each other, r. If we knew the mass of the Earth and the mass of the Moon and the distance between them, we could calculate the attraction that they have towards each other due to gravity, what that force is. Now this g value right here, this is a constant. This is not a variable, it's a constant. It is always this value right here. So this is not to be confused with little g. Little g is the acceleration due to gravity on the Earth's surface, which is 9.80 meters per second squared. That's an acceleration. The gravitational constant, big G, is 6.67 times 10 to the negative 11th Newton meters squared per kilogram squared. So basically it's just a conversion factor, if you want to think of it that way. It's a constant, it's a coefficient that you plug into this equation, multiply it by the two masses of the two objects being investigated, divided by the distance between them squared, and that will give you a force in newtons for what that force of gravity is between the two objects. How did we come up with the gravitational constant g? How do we know that it is what it is? Well, we owe the English scientist Lord Cavendish. He's the one who came up with the quantification of the gravitational constant. And he did it in kind of an impressive low-tech way. What he did is he set up this experiment where he had this string, and he attached to the string this mirror. And the mirror is attached in such a way that if the string rotates, then the mirror would rotate as well. From the string, he connected this horizontal rod, and at the end of the rod was attached two masses. Okay, he conducted this experiment in a dark room. I think it might have even been a tent with a tiny little pinhole poked in the wall of the tent, which allowed a single light source to come in and reflect off the mirror and then show on a scale that he had set up here. What he then did is he brought in another mass, A, and held it next to the mass hanging from this rod. What should happen is that mass B should be attracted to mass A due to gravity, and that's going to cause this whole apparatus to rotate. And as it rotates, the mirror rotates, and the beam of light shining on the scale will move some distance. And by knowing the amount of force required to rotate the system and the distance r between the two and the masses of mass A and mass B, Lord Cavendish was able to use Newton's formula to come up with the actual value of g. Just a pretty cool experiment, in my opinion. One of the cooler ones described in the textbook. So let's take our formula here and put it into use here in example. We have two people sitting on a bench. Person A is 50 kilograms. Person B is 70 kilograms. Now, believe it or not, these two people are actually exerting a gravitational force on each other. We don't feel it, we don't sense it because it's such a small force, but it is there. So we want to know what that is. How much force are they exerting on each other? Well, the formula is Fg, the force due to gravity, is equal to the gravitational constant times mass 1 times mass 2 divided by r squared. The gravitational constant is 6.67 times 10 to the negative 6th, and we're going to multiply that by 50 kilograms times 70 kilograms divided by the distance between them, 0.5 meters squared. And so when we solve this formula, we find that the force due to gravity between these two people is really small. It is approximately 1 times 10 to the negative 6th newtons, which would be 0.000001 newtons. That's a very small force. That's why we can't feel it. It doesn't actually cause one person to attract the other quite like that, but it is present nonetheless. So that's why we tend to just associate gravity with really big things with lots of mass, like the Earth or the Moon or the Sun. Those things have enough mass to create a gravitational force that we can actually detect.